My name is Natalie. I've been married to my husband, who I met through a friend, for 20 years. We're both approaching our mid-40s. We live with my husband Smith, our daughter Evelyn, our son Watson, and my mother-in-law. Before we got married, my husband seemed like a caring and reliable man who loved his mother. However, after marriage, it became clear that my mother-in-law adored her only son, and he often prioritized her over our family. When I tried to talk to him about the tough treatment I received from mother-in-law, he would say, "My mom is right," and he wouldn't listen to me. Life was bearable when we lived separately from mother-in-law, but when our second child, our son, was born, my father-in-law passed away suddenly. Concerned for mother-in-law, my husband suggested we move in with her. Once we started living together, mother-in-law's attitude toward me worsened. We had 2 kids to look after, and now mother-in-law's living expenses were added to our budget. My husband's income wasn't enough to cover our living expenses, let alone pay off loans, so I had to work as well. Mother-in-law didn't like this and said, "A wife should stay home and take care of the house," and "don't neglect household duties just because you work." But I had no choice but to work. Ignoring mother-in-law's objections, I started working full-time. Naturally, I couldn't devote all my time to housework. Things got tough and I asked my husband for help, but he would just lounge on the sofa, playing games on his smartphone even when he was home. Mother-in-law, instead of correcting him, would say, "Smith is tired from work. Natalie should handle everything at home." Moreover, mother-in-law wouldn't lift a finger, even for her own needs, and threw everything onto me. My husband seemed to like this, and stopped doing anything around the house. In the end, while working full-time, I had to handle all the housework and childcare for our family of 4, including mother-in-law. To make matters worse, mother-in-law demanded an allowance of $500 a month from our household budget, even though she contributed nothing. Mother-in-law doesn't contribute a single dollar to our household expenses. Of course, all of her food and utility bills come out of our budget. On top of that, she even demanded an allowance from our household income. Naturally, I refused, but mother-in-law argued, "The household income is Smith's earnings. You, as his wife, have no say in how it's spent." My husband backed her up, saying, "It's my money, so I can give it to my mom if I want to." Neither of them understood why I needed to work full-time. Yet, if I ever cut corners on housework due to my busy schedule, mother-in-law would criticize everything from the meals I prepared to how I cleaned. "Oh, take out again tonight? Poor kids," she'd say. Or, "Natalie, your cleaning is really sloppy," criticizing me at every turn. Even when I asked for help with the kids, neither my husband nor mother-in-law would lift a finger. Mother-in-law's favorite line was, "When I was young, I did all the housework and childcare myself." She'd go on and on about how great she was as a wife and mother, and how I fell short in both roles. Adding insult to injury, my husband would just listen and say nothing, making me feel even worse. But I could have tolerated all that. What hurt the most was mother-in-law telling my kids, "You two are really unfortunate," and "Such a careless person doesn't deserve to be a mother." I've never neglected my daughter or son, yet she had the audacity to say this. Thinking about how my kids must feel hearing that made me incredibly frustrated. Then one day it came to light that my husband was having an affair. My husband, who neglected household duties because he was busy with work and just lounged around on his days off, had betrayed me. Even after this revelation, he blamed me, saying, "You're always nagging to help around the house, so I never get a break." Mother-in-law chimed in, "This happened because you're not a good enough wife." They even said, "If you have complaints, then leave." All my efforts to keep our home together felt like they had been for nothing. I felt something inside me break. As our marital discussions continued, I grew increasingly exhausted. Finally, during one of our talks, I said, "Fine, I'll leave this house." Upon hearing this, mother-in-law neither got angry nor surprised. She just laughed and said, "Oh, you're finally leaving. Well, it won't make much difference whether you're here or not." Even my husband was indifferent, saying, "With Mom around, it's the same as if you were here. Do whatever you want." He probably planned to invite his affair partner home right away. They both seemed to think their lives wouldn't change a bit if I left. What had all my efforts for the family been for? I felt more empty than sad. It was probably all in vain. When the divorce was settled, I asked my kids, "What will you do?" My teenage daughter and son said, "We'll stay here. Grandma can handle things." "Don't you answer." "I'll stay too." Hearing their answers, mother-in-law smiled smugly. "Well, of course. Who'd want to go with a mother who can't even manage housework or childcare? Don't worry, I'll take care of everything perfectly from now on. Unlike you." She sneered. My husband just said, "I feel better leaving it to Mom." In the end, I left the house without my kids. A few days later, as I was leaving, mother-in-law taunted, "Leaving your kids behind? You're the worst kind of wife." I left home while being ridiculed by mother-in-law. Months after leaving, I'd finally stabilized my life. Then, out of the blue, I got a call. "Natalie? Where are you?" It was mother-in-law. I left my contact info for the sake of my kids, but mother-in-law sounded frantic. "Why do you need to know? I have no relation to that house anymore." "What are you talking about? Our home is a mess because you left!" According to mother-in-law, everything had gone downhill since I left. I was inwardly stunned. Unaware of my reaction, mother-in-law continued. "Every weekend, I have to accompany Watson to his soccer club. When there's a match, I even have to drive. And I have to buy drinks for everyone when it's our turn. Plus, there's the muddy uniforms to wash. No one told me parents had to polish soccer balls. Then there's driving Natalie to and from cram school, and it's costing extra for remedial classes. On top of that, Smith's income isn't enough to cover the mortgage, so now he's telling me to work. I have to get a part-time job. And Smith, when he gets home, he just lies on the sofa. He can't even put his dirty clothes in the laundry basket. I'm tired from working part-time, but he does nothing, saying he's tired. I have to do all the housework and laundry for the entire family by myself. And yet, all she does is complain about the food I make. Natalie, please come back." Clearly worn out, mother-in-law's voice was almost a scream, but I calmly responded. "Weren't you and Smith the ones who told me to leave? Weren't you supposed to handle everything perfectly on your own, unlike me?" I could tell mother-in-law was shocked on the other end of the phone. Her current situation was exactly where I had been just a few months ago, working to support the family, handling all the housework and childcare alone, and a husband who wouldn't help. Except she didn't have me to complain about, so she was better off. Probably the woman who was the husband's cheating partner, whom mother-in-law expected as a labor force. The woman my husband had an affair with left him right after I moved out. It would be so. Who would want to join a household with mother-in-law and 2 kids from a previous marriage? They probably thought she would fill the gap I left. But their plan failed, and now mother-in-law finally realized the gravity of the situation. Too late, and this was exactly the outcome my kids and I had anticipated. Of course, I will say this so that there is no misunderstanding. Let me clarify. Evelyn and Watson are very kind kids. They always offered to help, saying, "Mom, let me assist you," or "I can do this myself." They had seen how their father and grandmother treated me and were well aware of it. When I was finally pushed to the point of leaving, I first talked to my daughter and son. They immediately took my side. "You've done enough, Mom. You should leave this house." "I agree. Dad and Grandma are the ones at fault." They even offered to come with me. But then my daughter said, "Even if we leave, Dad and Grandma will never understand the struggles you've been through." "Yeah, they probably feel relieved," my son added. "We can't let that happen. They should realize how hard it's been for you. They chose to stay, thinking their father and grandmother would never understand my struggles if they left too. With that in mind, the two chose to stay at home on their own. Mother-in-law had no idea about this and assumed I had abandoned my kids. The outcome was clear. I never had high hopes for my husband, but mother-in-law couldn't possibly replace me in supporting the family, doing housework, and raising kids. And with just my husband's income, they couldn't even manage the household finances, let alone the mortgage. Mother-in-law probably finally realized where her allowance had been coming from. I had been the one doing all the housework and taking care of the kids while working. My husband and mother-in-law did nothing but complain, pushing everything onto me. Now they must have felt firsthand what I had been juggling all along. I regularly received updates from my kids about the situation at home. I even heard from them that my husband's plans to remarry his affair partner had fallen through. Mother-in-law had to get a part-time job because my income was gone. She was struggling with housework and childcare, while my husband remained as unhelpful as ever. The husband still does no housework at home, does nothing about the children, and everything is a burden on mother-in-law. My kids told me all of this. Thanks to them, the house is a mess, and the meals are mostly half-hearted. They must realize now how hard you had it, Mom. They must have understood, more than ever, who had been holding that household together. Please, Natalie, come back. Understood, I replied, and I could hear the relief in mother-in-law's voice. So you're coming back? But I answered, clearly and loudly, no, I'm not coming back. What I've realized is that I can't trust you or Smith with my children. I'll be taking my daughter and son. They want that too. What? You left them behind, didn't you? Mother-in-law sounded confused, but I continued. My kids have been watching all along. After that, my daughter, son, and I started a new life together. Of course, I made sure to claim compensation and child support through my lawyer during the divorce proceedings. I took a lump sum, thinking of the future. My husband and mother-in-law had to give up their house because they paid the lump sum child support and fell behind on their mortgage. To add insult to injury, I later found out that the reason my husband didn't remarry his affair partner was that she already had a family. He ended up being sued for compensation in another divorce case, leading him into debt. Now they're living in a cramped apartment, blaming each other for their woes. It's sad for a family to end up like this. As for us, the three of us are living happily, supporting each other every step of the way.